Hello friends, welcome back to CSharp.net online training video series. Today we are going to discuss partial class and partial methods in C# with examples. As part of this video, what we are going to discuss? We are going to discuss what are partial classes, what are partial methods, when and how to use partial classes and partial methods while working with the partial classes and partial methods. What are the rules and regulations that we need to follow. All these things we are going to discuss with examples as part of this video. So let us start today's discussion with one of the interview question, that is what are partial classes, right? So partial classes, it is actually a new feature, right? New feature which was introduced as part of CSharp 2.0, which allows us to define a class on multiple files. So defining class on multiple class files means we can physically split the content of the class into two different class files, but even physically they are divided, but logically it is only one single unit. That means what? Now a class in which code can be written in two or more class files is known as a partial class. To make any class as partial class, we need to use the keyword partial. You might be having some query, or you might be having some doubt what we have written in this statement, but don't worry, we'll once we start discussing, then you will get more clarity about this definition, right? So according to Microsoft, what is partial class means? It is possible to split the definition of a class over two or more source files. It is also possible to split the definition of a struct or an interface over two or more source files, which we will discuss when we discuss the C# 8 new features, right? Today we are going to keep focus on how we can split the definition of a class file into two or more class files, but how to split the definition of a struct and interface we will discuss later, right? But not today. Each source file contains a section of the type that what it means. So suppose one class, inside one class you might be declare some constructor, you might be declare some variable, fields, method, right? Some of the things you can put in one class file, and some other things, right, you can put in a different class files, but all these things are going to be combined when we compile the application, right? When we compile the application, even though we split the class definition into multiple classes, multiple class file, all those things are going to be grouped together and it will become a single class, right? We'll discuss this thing practically, right? So now let us understand partial class with an example. Okay. So what I'm trying to do is I'm creating one example, and in this example, I'm not okay. Let me create a class called employee. Okay, let me create a class called employee, employee.cs, and in this employee class I'm just copy pasting the code, right? So what code I have written here, I'm just copy pasting, right? So if you look at this class, okay, so if you look this employee class, then you will see that this class having four properties. What are the properties? First name, last name, gender, and salary. These are nothing but your four properties. And this is nothing but one public method which is going to display the full name of the employee. And if you want to display all the information of an employee, then you can call this display employee details method, right? So first name, last name, gender, and salary, everything is going to be displayed when you call this method. But if you just want to display the first name and last name, that is the full name of the employee, then you just need to call this method. And this is a very simple, or you can say it's a very straightforward class, right? Now what I can do is, now I can create an instance of this class. I can set the value for these four public properties, and then I can invoke these two methods from outside. And when I invoke these two methods, then the things what you have written as part of the method, that is going to be displayed. For example, I'm creating an employee object, right? So while I'm creating an employee object, I'm setting these four properties, right? So I'm setting the first name as Pranay, last name as Raut, salary is this much, and gender is male, right? Then once I create an instance of this employee class, then that instance is stored inside this reference variable emp, right? Then using that reference variable, I can invoke the methods what are declared inside this class. We have declared two public method, display full name and display employee details. So I can call those two methods. So once I call these two methods, then you will see that the first display full name method will display the full name, and the other method will display all the employee information on the console. See, You can see. So this is the full name Pranay and all the information that are displayed in the console, right? That is fine. Now what is our requirement? Now we want to split this above class definition into two files. So currently all these things are put together into a single class file, right? All these things are put inside a single class file, and we are creating an instance of this class file and invoking the method. Now what I want is, I want to declare, I want these four properties in a separate class file, and I want these two methods in a separate class file. Is that possible? Yes, it is possible. How it is possible? By using the partial classes. So what we need to do is, we can create one partial class where we will put these four properties, right? We can create another partial class, and inside that partial class we can put these two methods. But the fundamental thing, the point that you need to remember is, the name of the partial classes should be going to same, right? Even though the partial class is created in a different class file, the name is going to be same, right? So let me do one thing. Let me add one partial employee.cs class file, right? So this is, I'm adding partial employee one.cs class file, right? And again, I'm going to add another class file, partial employee two.cs class file. So currently, I'm trying to split the above class definition into two class files. So I'm creating two class files, right? So once I create the class file like this, public, I just make this class as public, and I also make this class as public. Then what I can do is public, right? Even though you created the class file name as partial employee 1 and 2, you need to keep the class name as same. You need to keep the class name as same. But in this case, you can see, while I'm making the class name as same, I'm getting one error, because you cannot define it two class name or two classes with the same name in a single namespace. Here, the namespace name is partial class demo, and here also the namespace name is partial class demo. So this is created first, so that is fine. I'm not getting any error. But when I created the same class name, then I'm getting error. To remove this error, what I can do is, I can make this class as partial, and even I can also make this as class as partial. Once I make this class as partial, that means this partial class definition now split across two class files. One class file is public employee one, and another class file is public employee two. Even though the class definition is split across two different class files, but when we compile the code, then you will see that only one class is going to be generated, right? Now, what is our requirement? Our requirement is, we need to put these four properties in one class file. Let's copy the properties and put it here, right? Now, let's put all the rest two method in the other class file. So let me copy the code and put it here. Now, you can see we are splitting the class definition in two class file. And the interesting thing that you need to observe is, this first name and last name and this gender and salary properties are not defined in this part, right? These four properties are defined the other part of this class, right? Other part of this partial class, and you can see this is the other part. Here you can define the properties, but you can use those properties. Why? Because even though physically we have split the class definition into two parts, right? This is part one and this is part two, but logically, right? But logically, they are going to be treated as a single class. Single class means there is, you can consider there is one class whose name is partial employee. Within that class, these four properties are there, and these are the two properties, right? So you can consider like this, right? So this is how you can split the class definition using this, right? Now what you can do is, instead of creating an instance of employee class, you can create an instance of a partial employee class, right? So once you create an instance of the partial employee class, then you can also call this method. If you remember these four properties, what I am setting here, these properties are defined in this class file. And what method I am calling here, they are defined in a different class file. Even though they are separate, but technically, but logically, they are only one. Now you can run the application and you can see the output as expected, right? So what output previously we got, right? We will get the same output in this case also. This is how you can split the class definition into two more class file, right? Now you can see, so can you prove that there is only one class file available? There is no two class file in the compiled code. Yes, we can prove this. How we can prove this? There is only one solution. What is the solution? That is nothing but your ILDSM code, right? So let me delete this employee class, which is no more required. Okay, let me delete the employee class, and then let me build the solution. So once the build succeeded, let me go to the path where the exe is generated. So bin debug, and you can see this is the path. Once you got the path, then what you can do is you can go to Visual Studio Developer command prompt, right? So I'm just opening the Visual Studio Developer command prompt, and after opening this, you need to type ILDASM and then press enter. Once you press enter, then go to the file location where your exe is generated. My location is this one. Then select the exe and open that exe. Right. Once you open that exe in your ILDSM tool, then you will see that there is only one class. What is the name of the class? Partial employee. Even though physically we have created two employee, partial employee, right? In partial employee class inside this partial employee one.ch class file, partial employee two again created inside partial employee two.ch class file. But when we compile, we can see we have only one partial employee class. So you can see these are the four properties what you have defined, and for each auto implemented properties, we have a pair of setter and getter method, and this is the display full name method, and this is your display employee name method, and this is your constructor. Why constructor is there? Because it is a non-static class, and that constructor we are not providing. That's why compiler providing that default constructor, which is public and a parameter. So you can see there is only one partial class and one program class. There is no two partial class. Why? Because physically we have separated the class definition, but when we compile the code, they become only one class file, right? That is what you need to remember right now. So the point that you need to remember is, even though the partial class definition split into multiple files, after compilation, they will become a single class file only, right? Now, when do we need to use partial classes in your real-time application, right? When we are working on a large project, splitting a class over separate files allows multiple programmers to work on it simultaneously. Even though Microsoft claims this thing, right? If you are developing a large project, and if you split the class definition over multiple files, then it will allow multiple programmers to work on it simultaneously. But to be fact, the fact thing is that I have even worked for 10 years in the industry, but I never seen this thing practically, right? We never split the class definition into multiple class file so that multiple programmer can work on it simultaneously. And I hope if you are having experienced developer and if you are working on any kind of a real-time project, then you might not come across this scenario where you have split the class definition into multiple files, right? And the second advantage is what Microsoft claiming that when working with automatically generated source code, the code can be added to the class without having to recreate the source file, right? Visual Studio uses this approach when creating Windows Form, right? Web service wrapper code and so on. So if you are working with web form application, Windows Form application, the code behind file, what Visual Studio automatically generated, you will see that those code files are nothing but partial classes only, right? But in my scenario, in my experience, where I have used the partial class is this, right? In my project, I'm using entity framework database first approach. In that case, the entity framework will create the model, that is classes, based on the database, right? In my database, if 5 tables are there, then my database first approach entity framework will create 5 models for those 5 tables. And these model classes, if you go and if you check, these model classes are nothing but partial classes only. Next, I want to do some modification with the auto-generated partial model classes, right? Once the entity framework generated means those model classes are nothing but partial classes and those are auto-generated. And now I want to do some kind of, I want to add some additional property or I want to add some attribute, right? then I have two options. I can do the changes within the auto-generated partial classes. But what is the problem if I do the changes with the auto-generated partial classes? Means once I update the ADMX file, then manually what changes I have done with the partial classes, right? Those changes will be lost. So generally what I do is I create partial classes, right? So suppose the entity framework generate one partial class employee, then I can create another partial class with the same name employee, and whatever additional property, whatever customization I required for the employee class, I can do inside that manually created partial employee class, right? This is one real-time scenario. I will discuss this thing when we will cover entity framework in this course, right? While we are learning entity framework, I will show all these things practically, how this auto-generated class is created, right? How it is partial, right? If I am doing modification with the auto-generated partial code, then how the code lost, right? I will show you then how we can overcome by creating a separate partial class. We will see this practically, right? Now, so while working with partial classes, we need to follow some rules and regulations, right? Now let us discuss what are the rule and the regulation. The first rule is that all the parts that contain the class definition must use the partial keyword, right? So suppose in this case, this is my partial class employee and this is another partial class, right? Here I'm using partial, here also I'm using partial. If I remove this partial, then I will get a comparative error. What error I'm getting? Now it is saying missing partial modifier on declaration of type partial employee. Another partial declaration of this type is. What he is saying that there is a partial employee class exist in your code. Are you missing the partial modifier? If you are missing the partial modifier, please use it. Otherwise, you are going to get a compiler error. Why? Because there is already a partial class with the name partial employee exist in your code. That is what you can see here, right? Now, what is the rule 2 is saying all the parts of the partial class must have the same access modifier. If we try to use a different access modifier for the different parts of the class, then we will get a compiler error, right? So we already know that for any class, right? Let me make this class as partial so that the current error will go, right? So we already know for class, we have allowed only two access specifier. What are these? Public and internal. Public and internal means if you are declaring the class with partial class with public means all the part of this partial class should be public. If you try to use a different access specifier, then you will get error. So in this case, I'm making this internal. And if I go to the other part, then definitely I will get a compiler error. Why this compiler error? Because partial declaration of partial employee have a conflicting accessibility modifier. That means, see, if we are making one as public and if we are making another thing as internal, means both are conflicting now. Public saying you can access this class from anywhere, but internal saying you can access this class within the same assembly. That means there is a conflicting. Because of this conflicting, we are getting this error. So either you have to use internal in both the cases, or you have to use public in both the cases. So I'm using internal, so I'm not getting any kind of error, right? Now let me make this as a public, and as well as let me make this as public. And as soon as I make both the classes as public, then you will show there is no more error. So this is the point that you need to remember. All the parts of the partial class must have the same accessibility modifier, right? If any parts are declared as abstract, then the entire type is considered as abstract. Or if any parts are declared as sealed, then the entire type is considered as sealed. Or if any part of the parts inherit a class, then the entire type inherits that class, right? Let me explain this thing. Suppose I'm public partial, I'm making this as abstract class, right? So as soon as make this class as abstract, I'm getting this error. Okay, so before partial, we need to use the abstract modifier. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so as soon as I make this partial, I make this class as partial, that means the entire class is going to be partial. So it doesn't mean that this part is not partial and this part is partial. It means this class is partial. This class, wherever the declaration part of this class is available, that is going to be partial. That means here this is also going to be partial. As I make one of the part as partial means the entire class becomes partial, right? And we know once you make a class as partial, then we cannot create an instance of the partial class. Now go to the program class and see we are getting one error. Why we are getting this error? Because what error is saying? See, cannot create an instance of the abstract class or interface. So if you are creating an abstract class or if you are creating an interface, then you cannot create an instance. Now this partial employee class is an abstract class, and you cannot create an instance of the abstract class. See, here we are not making the second part as abstract. We are making the first part as abstract. But once we make a part as abstract, means the whole type is going to be abstract only. So this is the third one that you need to remember. So let me remove this so that the error will be gone, right? So this is the point, right? The next rule. C# does not support multiple class inheritance, right? C# doesn't support multiple class inheritance, that we already discussed in our multiple inheritance article. See, in our multiple inheritance article, in our multiple inheritance video, what we discussed? We discussed that multiple inheritance is not supported through classes, and the reason for this is ambiguity problem, right? And we also discussed that we can implement multiple inheritance through interfaces. So as multiple inheritance is not supported through classes, that means part of the partial class must not specify different base classes. Part of the partial classes must not specify different base classes, right? What it means. Okay, let me explain this with one example, right? Suppose this is one class, public class, and this class name is customer. Customer, right? This is one class customer, and I'm creating another class. Let's say this is employee, right? This is one class, this is another class. I'm now creating another partial class, right? Public. Let me create this as a partial class. Let me make this class as partial class one, right? Class one, and this class inherited from customer. That is fine, right? That is fine. Now, what I'm trying to do, I'm creating another partial class, not another partial class. Partial class means another part of the partial class. Now, I can implement this customer class. That is fine. But as soon as I type this as employee, I will get the error. Why we are getting the error? Because technically, if you speak, this is one part of the partial class. This is another part of the partial class. But technically, this is a one class, and one class cannot inherit from two base classes. If one class is inheriting from multiple base classes, what it means? It means it is multiple inheritance through classes, and we already know that this concept is not supported in C#, right? This is the reason why you can see multiple parts of the partial class cannot have different base classes. You can have same base class, right? If you type customer, you can type customer here. That is fine, no issue, right? But you cannot specify different base classes. It means you cannot specify customer here, you cannot specify employee here. This is not possible, right? And if you try, you will get this error. And what errors in class one must not specify different base classes. This is the fourth point that you need to remember. But it is possible with the partial class that the different part of the partial class can specify different base interface, and the final type should implement all the interface method. Yeah, this is fine. This is absolutely fine. What it means, now it means multiple class inheritance is not there, but multiple interface inheritance is there. What it means, you can create one interface, right? This is interface I employee, this is interface I customer, and this partial class implement I employee, and E provide implementation to this employee method, right? And another class, partial class, it provide implementation to the I customer. This is possible because this is one interface and this is one interface, and technically, if you speak, this is a single class which is implementing two different interfaces. And we know that multiple inheritance through interfaces is possible in C#. This is absolutely fine, right? So any member that are declared in a partial definition are available to all of the other parts of the partial class. Once you understand partial classes, now let us move further and try to understand partial method. What are partial method? A partial class may contain a partial method or multiple partial method. multiple partial methods. One part of the class contains the signature of the method, and an implementation of the partial method can be defined in the same part or other parts of the partial class, right? So what it means? It means a partial, whenever you are creating a partial class, it might be possible that that partial class may contain some partial methods. One method, multiple method, that is fine, right? And when you are working with the partial method, right, you need to remember that one part of the class contains the signature of the method. So you need to define the signature first, and then you need to provide implementation of that method either in the same part or in the different part, right? Other part or same part, right? That means you cannot provide the implementation and the declaration at the same time. First of all, you need to declare the method, that is, you need to provide the signature, then you need to implement the method, right? Implementing the method is optional. Optional in the sense, if you want, you can implement the method in the same part. If you don't want, if you want to implement the method in other part of the partial class, that is also possible. And if you don't want to implement the method, then that is also possible, right? If the implementation is not supplied, that means if you have not implement the method, then the method and all calls to the partial method are simply removed by the compiler at the time of compilation, right? This is the point that you need to remember, right? Let us understand this with an example. So what I'm trying to do, whatever code I have written already, let me remove. Let start understanding partial methods, right? So what I'm trying to do is I'm creating one class. I'm creating one class called partial class, and within this partial class, I'm going to do the functionality, right? So I'm creating one class, partial class. I'm just adding that class, right? And within this class, I'm just copy pasting this code, right? So what it means, you can see in this partial class, so I'm declaring one partial method, right? So you cannot provide implementation at this time. If you try to provide implementation, you'll get one error, right? Partial method implementation is not possible at the same time, right? What mirror? No defining declaration found for implementing declaration of partial method. Means he is saying that you are implementing this partial method here, but there is no declaration found, right? That means, first of all, you need to declare the partial method, right? Then implementing this partial method is optional. If you want, you can implement this partial method within this class. If you want, you can implement this partial method other part of this partial class. And if you don't want, then don't implement this partial method. That is also absolutely fine. And in this case, if you look, this is one partial method and this is a non-partial method. You can say it's a concrete method, right? And I'm giving the name as public method, and from this partial public method I'm calling this partial method, right? But if you remember, the implementation is not provided. If the implementation is not provided, right, if the implementation is not provided, then what will happen? Now the partial method signature declaration, this statement, and the partial method calling statement, wherever you call this partial method, are simply removed by the compiler, right? So what it means, now in this example, I'm not providing implementation. In this example, I'm not providing implementation to my partial method, right? I'm not providing implementation to this partial method. Now, if I compile this program, that right, once I compile this program, you can see it succeeded. I'm not getting any kind of error. Why? Even though the implementation of this method is not available, the compiler not giving me any kind of error. Why? Now the reason is compiler simply removing this statement and this statement. As compiler doesn't find any implementation of this method, so the declaration and all call to that particular method is simply removed by the compiler, right? That means after compilation, you will see that this partial class having only one method, that is public method, and you will not find this method, right? To prove this, what I can do is I can build the solution, right? Build succeeded. I can open the ILDSM tool, right? I just open the ILDSM tool and I just go to the partial. Yeah, you can see in this class, you can see I'm having partial class. Yes, partial class is there, and you will see that only public method signature is there. You will not find that partial method signature. Why? Because after compilation, the compiler removed that. Na? If compiler removed that, then how you will find that inside the compilation compiled code? This is nothing but your compiled code. Na? In compiled code, you can see the public method is there, the public constructor is there, but the partial method signature is not there. And if you also open this code, then you will also not find that that partial method call statement. See, there is no call to the partial method available currently in the bytecode, or you can say in the IL code of this class, right? So point that you need to remember is, if the implementation is not provided, then the compiler simply ignores this thing. Now if you run this application, then you will see that this method simply going to be executed, right? So let me create an instance of partial class and call that method, right? So you can see I'm creating an instance of partial class and calling the public method, and in this case, right, that public method is simply going to be executed, right? Let me run the application, and once we run the application, you will see that that public method invoked statement is there, right? That is fine. Now, the implementation of the partial method as discussed can be provided in the same part or in other part of the partial class, right? Now, let us add a class file with the name partial class 2. So now what I'm trying to do is I'm going to provide the implementation. For providing implementation, see, first of all, you can provide implementation within the same class, right? So within the same class means you can see what I'm trying to do. I'm just making this as a partial method, right? And okay, okay. So why I'm getting this error? Yeah. See, you can see you can define the you can provide the implementation within the same class. See, here I'm providing the implementation, and you can see I'm providing the implementation here, right? So the implementation you can provide in the same part, as well as you can also provide in the other part of your application, right? Let me create a different class file, right? Partial class 2, and within that partial class 2, I'm going to provide the implementation, right? So I'm providing partial class 2.cs, and within that class, I'm going to provide the implementation, right? So you can see I'm also providing the class name as same means the partial class, and I'm also making this class as a partial because here I'm making this class as partial, and here I'm providing the implementation for the partial, right? Now the implementation is provided. So we have two options. If you want, you can provide the implementation with the same part, and if you want, you can provide implementation in the other part. And we have already seen if we are not providing any implementation, then that is also fine. So in this case, now as we have provided implementation, then you will see that this public method will invoke, right? This public method, this statement is going to be invoked, execute, and after this will call the partial method. And the partial method means this implementation is going to be executed. Now, if you run the application, then you will see that both the method are going to be executed and both the print statement is going to be displayed in the console, right? That is what you can see in the above screen. That is fine, right? Now while working with the partial method, again we need to understand some rules, right? Understanding the rule is very important, because until and unless we were not understanding the rules and the regulation, then we cannot properly utilize the concept, right? See, first rule, partial method in C# are private by default, and we cannot use any access specifier explicitly. If we try to use any access specifier explicitly, then we will get some kind of error. See, this is one partial method, right? And by default, this method is going to be private. If I make this as a private explicitly, right? If I make this private explicitly, then I will get some error. Because what error? Partial method cannot have access modifier or virtual absolute used. So no keyword or no modifiers are allowed to the partial method. Even though if I try to make this as public, I will get the same error, right? So partial method cannot have additional or you cannot explicitly specify any kind of a modifier. That is not possible, because and by default this partial method is going to be private. That is what I'm showing here. Rule 2, Partial method declaration and implementation should not be at the same time, right? So in this case, if you look, this is the declaration and the implementation is provided here, right? Now, if you try to provide the declaration and implementation at the same time, then you will get some compilation error. Now what I'm trying to do, I'm providing the declaration and implementation at the same time. So here I'm declaring and here I'm providing the implementation. This is not possible. The declaration should be at one place and the implementation should be at a different place. Different place in the sense what? Now that implementation might be in the same class. Suppose your declaration is here, you can provide the implementation here, or you can also provide the implementation here. But the thing is that you cannot provide multiple implementation. Multiple implementation means here you are providing one implementation, then how you can provide another implementation of the same class? Because method overriding is not possible in C Sharp. Na? What it means, in a single class, you cannot define two methods with the same name and same parameter. And if you are providing implementation at two places, that means you are defining the same method twice inside the same class, and this is not possible. This is not possible means method overriding is not possible in the same class, right? So you have to declare the method first, then you need to provide the implementation, and you need to provide the implementation only once. That is what the next point, right? A partial method return type must be void. If we try to use any other return type, then we'll get some kind of error. See here, I'm using return type as void. And if I try to make this as integer, then we will get a error, right? Because other than void, you cannot explicitly specify anything, right? So all the partial method that you are going to define, they are going to be used for void only, right? The method return type should be void. Anything apart from void, if you try to use string, integer, boolean, float, then you will get some kind of compilation error, right? The next method, a partial method must and should be declared within the partial class or partial struct. A non-partial class or struct cannot declare any kind of partial. See, in this case, right, what I'm trying to do, I'm just removing the partial key. So as soon as I remove the partial keyword, say it becomes a non-partial class, right? So as it becomes a non-partial class, so it is giving me no error. What error I'm getting here? I'm getting the following error, right? So, okay. So let me comment this one first, because it will give you some different message. See now what I'm trying to do, I'm making this partial class. So this is not a partial class. Okay, let me change the name, public class one. So I'm creating one class, and inside this class, this is a non-partial class, and I'm trying to create a partial method. You cannot create. Partial method means it should be exist inside the partial class only. If it is not a partial class, then you cannot declare a partial method. That is what the next rule that you need to remember, right? As soon as I make this class as partial, then the error is gone. That means partial method can only be declared inside a partial class, right? The signature of the partial method declaration must match the signature of the implementation, else you will get a compilation error. What it means, suppose here you are declaring the partial method with integer parameter. Now while providing the implementation, right? Now, while providing the implementation, you need to provide the same signature, right? So you can see here partial method with one parameter, and here I'm declaring one partial method without passing parameter. As the signature is not matched, so we will get some compilation error. But as soon as I make this as integer x or y or something else, then you will see that the compilation error is gone. Here we are getting error. Why? Because while calling this method, I need to pass some integer value now. So if I pass this, then the error will be gone. So the point that you need to remember, the signature of the partial method declaration and the implementation should be same. Taking one parameter means it is mandatory to pass one parameter. If this method not taking any parameter means you don't need to pass any parameter. You don't need to pass any value. So this is the next point that you need to remember. The signature of the partial method declaration and the implementation must be matched. A partial method can be implemented only once, either in the same part or in other part of the partial class. We have already discussed, right? This is one implementation, right? And if you try to re-implement the same method, then you will get error. Why we are getting the error? Because method overriding is not possible. Okay, physically we are creating one class and here we are creating one class, but after compilation these two class becomes a single class, right? And in this single class you will find one implementation and you will find another implementation. This is not possible because inside a single class we cannot define one method with the same name and same parameter, because method overriding is not possible within a single class. This is the reason why you cannot provide multiple implementation for your partial method in C sharp. This is the next point that you need to remember, right? This is the next point. So that's it. We have discussed what is partial class. We have discussed what is partial methods, how to use partial class and how to use partial method, what are the rules and regulations that we need to remember while working with partial class and partial method. In case you need the text version or the text document, right, whatever theory, whatever example I'm using in this presentation, in case you need, then the link for the same is provided in the video description section, right? Just go to the link and get the document. That's it for today. Thank you for watching this video.